Have you ever given your heart and soul to a company, only to be tossed aside like yesterday's leftovers? That's exactly what happened to me. But here's the twist. They didn't realize I was holding the keys to their future in my hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I remember the exact moment my world turned upside down. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in Seattle, the kind where the fog hangs low over the city and everyone clutches their coffee cups like lifelines. I was in my office at Meridian Solutions, reviewing the final touches on a presentation that had consumed the last 6 months of my life. This wasn't just any project. It was the Morrison partnership, a deal that would either launch our tech consulting firm into the stratosphere or leave us gasping for air among our competitors. My name is Alexandra Parker, Alex to everyone who knows me, and for 7 years, I had been the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Meridian. I built the department from scratch when we were just a scrappy team of 12 people working out of a converted warehouse in the industrial district. Now we occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise with over 200 employees and clients across 4 continents. I was adding notes to my presentation when Marcus Foster, our newly appointed COO and the founder's nephew, appeared in my doorway. I'd never liked Marcus, with his custom Italian suits and the way he looked through people rather than at them. He'd been with us for barely 3 months, parachuted in from some investment firm in New York with 0 experience in our industry, but plenty of opinions about how we should run things. "Alex, my office." "Now," he said, not waiting for a response, before turning on his heel. I saved my work and followed him down the hall, nodding to Elena at her desk as I passed. She gave me a concerned look. Marcus summoning anyone to his office usually ended with someone in tears or rage updating their LinkedIn profile. His office was minimalist to the point of sterility. No photos, no plants, just expensive modernist, furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. He didn't offer me a seat. "I've decided to restructure the partnerships division," he announced, shuffling through papers on his desk without looking up. "Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." I thought I'd misheard him. "Excuse me?" "It's nothing personal," he continued, though everything about his tone suggested otherwise. "Your approach is outdated. We need fresh perspectives, more aggressive strategies." "Marcus, the Morrison deal closes on Friday. I've been working with them for months." "That's been reassigned to the team in business development. They're taking a different approach." My stomach dropped. They don't know the first thing about Morrison's needs or their concerns about data security. The whole deal hinges on... "That's not your concern anymore." He cut me off, finally looking up. There was something in his eyes, not just indifference but satisfaction. "HR will email you the separation details. You can clear out your desk now." I stood there, shocked into silence. 7 years, countless all-nighters. Missing my sister's wedding because a client in Tokyo needed an emergency consultation. Postponing vacations, doctor's appointments, a personal life, all sacrificed for Meridian. And in less than 3 minutes, Marcus had erased it all. "Fine," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Good luck with Morrison. You'll need it." I walked out with my head high, though inside I felt like I was fracturing into 1,000 pieces. Elena saw my face as I returned to my office and immediately closed the door behind us. "What happened?" she whispered. "I've been let go," I said, the words sounding foreign in my mouth. "Restructuring, apparently." Her eyes widened. 3 days before Morrison? Is he insane? I started gathering my personal items into a cardboard box someone from HR had discreetly delivered. Apparently, the business development team is taking over. "Alex, they don't know anything about..." "I know." I unpinned the Seattle skyline photo from my bulletin board. "But it's not my problem anymore." Elena leaned closer. Walter doesn't know about this, does he? He's still in Singapore. Walter Chen, Meridian's founder and CEO, was overseas finalizing our Asia-Pacific expansion. He'd built the company from nothing, a first-generation immigrant with a brilliant mind for technology and a genuine concern for both clients and employees. Unlike his nephew, who seemed to view the company as his personal chess set. "I doubt it," I said. "But I'm not going to fight this, Elena. If this is how they value 7 years of my life, then I don't want to be here anymore." She helped me pack, and within 30 minutes, I was walking through the lobby, a box in my arms and a security escort 3 steps behind me. Standard procedure for departed executives, though it felt like a final humiliation. The rain had started as I loaded my box into my car. Fitting, I thought. Seattle saying goodbye in its own way. That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking Lake Union, nursing a glass of wine and staring at my silent phone. No calls from colleagues expressing shock or solidarity. No message from Walter. Just an automated email from HR with information about my severance package and a reminder about my non-disclosure agreement. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt a strange, detached curiosity. Why now? Why 3 days before the biggest deal in the company's history? Marcus was arrogant, yes, but he wasn't stupid. Something didn't add up. And then it hit me. The Morrison protocol. 6 months earlier, when we first began discussions with Morrison, Technologies about a potential partnership, their CEO, James Morrison, had insisted on an unusual condition. Due to a previous data breach that had cost them millions, Morrison had demanded extraordinary security measures for any company they partnered with. Walter and I had developed a custom authentication protocol that would govern all our interactions, from email to data storage to financial transactions. The protocol was complex, with multiple layers of security and specific communication procedures. And here was the critical part. I was the only person at Meridian fully authorized to execute it. My digital signature, my security clearances, my relationships with the Morrison security team, all of it was specified in the agreement. Without me, there was no protocol. Without the protocol, there was no deal. Had Marcus even read the contract? Did he understand what he'd done by removing me? I pulled out my laptop and scrolled through my personal backup of the Morrison agreement. There it was, in black and white. All security protocols to be executed solely by Alexandra Parker, Director of Strategic Partnerships, or her expressly designated and pre-approved substitute. There was no substitute. We hadn't designated, one because I'd been handling everything perfectly. I closed my laptop and looked out at the rain-blurred lights reflecting on the lake. For the first time since walking out of Marcus's office, I smiled. He had no idea what he'd just done. The next morning, I woke to a series of increasingly urgent text messages. 8:02 a.m. Elena. They can't find the final protocol docs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. BD team freaking out. 8:17 a.m. Elena. Marcus asking where you stored everything. I played dumb. 8:46 a.m. Elena. Emergency meeting called. Morrison team arriving early for pre-meeting. 9:15 a.m. Elena. Call me. I waited until 10 a.m. before responding, after making myself a leisurely breakfast and taking a long shower. Luxuries I rarely enjoyed on workdays. Elena, what's happening? I asked when she picked up on the first ring. Complete meltdown, she whispered. I could hear voices in the background. Marcus can't find the final version of the protocol. The business development team has no idea how to implement it. Morrison's advanced team is here, and they're asking technical questions no one can answer. Did he check the shared drive? I asked innocently. Of course, but you know the most sensitive documents weren't stored there for security reasons. She paused. Walter called from Singapore. He's livid. My heart skipped. He knows I was fired? Not yet. Marcus told him you were unavailable and that he was handling the Morrison deal personally. I considered this. Walter wasn't due back for another 2 days after the Morrison deal was supposed to be finalized. Marcus was clearly hoping to present him with a fait accompli. Me gone, the deal secured, his position strengthened. Alex, Elena continued, her voice dropping even lower. Morrison's security officer just told Marcus they need to verify the protocol implementation with you personally. It's in the contract. I could picture Marcus's face, that flash of realization, the dawning horror as he understood what he'd done. The thought gave me more satisfaction than it probably should have. What did he say? He's been locked in his office for the last 20 minutes. I think he's having some kind of breakdown. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an incoming call, a number I didn't recognize. I said goodbye to Elena and answered. Alexandra Parker. I kept my tone neutral. Alex, it's Marcus. His voice was strained, attempting a friendliness that had never existed between us. Hope you're doing well this morning. What can I do for you, Marcus? There seems to be a small issue with some documentation for the Morrison deal. I was hoping you might point us in the right direction. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I'm afraid I don't understand. I was informed yesterday that my approach was outdated, and the business development team was taking a different approach with Morrison. He cleared his throat. Perhaps I was hasty in my assessment. The team could use your expertise for a smooth transition. I see. And how would that work exactly? As a consultant? Another pause. We could discuss bringing you back in your previous capacity. This restructuring is still in the planning phase, after all. So I wasn't fired. I kept my voice light, curious. Let's call it a miscommunication, he said. The important thing is getting the Morrison deal across the finish line. The advance team is here, and they're asking for you specifically. I thought about the countless nights I'd stayed late perfecting this deal, the months of building trust with the Morrison team, the security protocol I'd helped design specifically to address their concerns. I'd be happy to help, I said finally. I could hear his sigh of relief through the phone. But not today, I added. I have some personal matters to attend to. Perhaps tomorrow. Tomorrow? His voice rose an octave. The Morrison team is here now. They expect answers today. That's unfortunate timing, isn't it? I said. I could try to free up some time this afternoon, but I'd need certain assurances first. What kind of assurances? His tone was cautious now. I'd like to speak with Walter directly, and I'd need an official retraction of my termination, in writing, with confirmation of my position and authority moving forward. Walter is in meetings in Singapore all day, Marcus said quickly, and HR typically handles employment documentation, which could take some time. Then I guess I'll see you tomorrow, Marcus. Good luck with the Morrison team. I moved to end the call. Wait. The desperation in his voice was unmistakable. I'll see what I can do. Can I call you back in an hour? Of course, I said pleasantly. I'll be here. After hanging up, I walked to my balcony and looked out at the Seattle skyline, the familiar silhouette of the Space Needle against the clearing morning sky. For the first time since yesterday, I felt in control again. My phone buzzed 40 minutes later. Not Marcus, but a Singapore number. Alex, it's Walter. What the hell is going on? The familiar voice of my mentor and boss for the past 7 years brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Hello, Walter. I'm surprised Marcus gave you my message. He didn't. Elena did. His tone softened slightly. She said Marcus fired you yesterday. Is that true? Yes. He called it restructuring. Walter swore in Mandarin. a habit from his childhood that emerged when he was truly angry. 3 days before Morrison? Is he out of his mind? Apparently, the business development team is taking a different approach. I quoted, "The business development team couldn't find their way out of a paper bag without a GPS." Walter sighed heavily. "Alex, I had no idea. I'm still in Singapore for the next 36 hours, but I want you to know this was not authorized by me. I appreciate that, Walter. The Morrison team is asking for you. They won't proceed without your verification of the security protocol." I know. There was a pause, and I could almost see him rubbing his temples the way he did when facing a particularly thorny problem. "You built this deal from nothing, Alex. You know how important it is for our future." "I do. What do you need from me to make this right?" I considered this carefully. Revenge wasn't my goal, tempting as it might be. I'd put too much of myself into Meridian to want to see it fail. But I needed guarantees. First, I want my job back, officially in writing, with a proper apology, I said. Second, I want autonomy over my department. No interference from Marcus or anyone else without direct consultation. Third, I want to be part of the leadership discussions about the company's direction. If I'm going to commit to Meridian's future, I need to have a voice in shaping it. Walter was quiet for a moment. Those are reasonable requests. I'll have legal draft something immediately. As for Marcus, that's between you and him, I interjected. I just need to know I won't be blindsided again. You have my word, he said solemnly. Will you come in today? The Morrison team is waiting. I agreed to arrive at 2 p.m., giving Walter time to arrange the paperwork and, I suspected, to have a very uncomfortable conversation with his nephew. When I walked through Meridian's lobby that afternoon, the receptionist's eyes widened. Clearly, news of my departure had circulated. I made my way to the executive floor without an escort this time, nodding to surprised colleagues as I passed. Elena was waiting by my office, which, thankfully, hadn't been reassigned yet. You're back, she whispered, giving me a quick hug. For now, I said. Where's the Morrison team? Conference room A. Their security officer has been grilling Marcus for the past hour. She couldn't quite hide her smile. It's not going well. And Marcus? Alternating between damage control and looking like he might be sick. She handed me a folder. This just came from legal. Walter had them prepare it on priority. Inside was an official reinstatement letter, an apology for the miscommunication, and a revised contract outlining my expanded role and autonomy. It was everything I'd asked for. The Morrison team is waiting for you, Elena added. They refused to continue discussions with anyone else. I straightened my jacket and headed to the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see James Morrison's security officer, a former military man named Michael Reynolds, standing with his arms crossed while Marcus gestured frantically at a laptop. When I entered, the relief on Reynolds' face was almost comical. Ms. Parker, he said, extending his hand. Glad you could join us. We were beginning to worry about the status of our security protocol. My apologies for the delay, Mr. Reynolds. There was a brief administrative misunderstanding, but it's been resolved. I glanced at Marcus, who was staring intently at the table. Excellent, Reynolds said. Mr. Morrison will be pleased. He specifically mentioned your attention to detail as one of the reasons he felt comfortable moving forward with Meridian. For the next 2 hours, I walked Reynolds and his team through the security protocol implementation. Marcus remained unusually quiet, speaking only when directly addressed. When the Morrison team seemed satisfied, Reynolds pulled me aside. There was some confusion earlier about who was leading this partnership, he said quietly. Mr. Foster seemed to think the business development team would be taking over. That was part of the misunderstanding, I replied smoothly. I'll be your primary contact throughout the partnership, with full authority to implement all aspects of our agreement. Reynolds nodded, visibly relieved. That's what we'd hoped, Mr. Morrison values consistency. After the Morrison team departed, satisfied that everything was on track for Friday's final signing, I returned to my office to find Marcus waiting. "Well played," he said, his voice tight. "Walter called me this morning. He's not happy." "I imagine not." "This isn't over, you know." His tone was cold, his earlier desperation replaced by something harder. "Walter won't be CEO forever." I regarded him calmly. "Is that a threat, Marcus?" "An observation." He straightened his tie. "Enjoy your victory lap." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "For what it's worth, I don't consider this a victory. I just want to do the job I've spent 7 years building." He didn't respond, and I watched him walk away, his shoulders rigid with wounded pride. I knew enough about men like Marcus to recognize that he wouldn't forget this humiliation. He would regroup, recalculate, and wait for another opportunity to strike. But that was a problem for another day. For now, I had a partnership to finalize and a team to reassure. Over the next 2 days, I worked with the Morrison team to complete the final preparations for the signing ceremony. Word of my administrative leave and subsequent return had spread throughout the office, transforming into a dozen different rumors, each more dramatic than the last. I neither confirmed nor denied any of them, focusing instead on making sure the Morrison deal went flawlessly. Walter returned from Singapore on Thursday night and came straight to the office despite his jet lag. He found me still working at 9:12 p.m. "You should go home and rest," he said, leaning against my doorframe. "Tomorrow's a big day." "I could say the same to you," I replied, gesturing to the dark circles under his eyes. He smiled faintly. "I'll sleep when the deal is signed." He stepped into my office, closing the door behind him. "Alex, I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have left Marcus with that much authority while I was away." "You couldn't have known what he'd do." "No, but I should have been more careful about the company I've built." He sighed. "Family is complicated." "What's going to happen with him?" I asked, finally giving voice to the question that had been nagging at me. Walter's expression turned grim. "He's been removed from operational decisions. For now, he'll focus on investor relations, something he might actually be good at, with supervision. His parents are major shareholders, so I can't simply let him go." I nodded, understanding the delicate balance Walter had to maintain between family obligations and company welfare. "But make no mistake," he continued, "your position is secure. The board has approved your new role and authority. Once this Morrison deal is finalized, we'll announce your promotion to the executive leadership team." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you, Walter." He shook his head. "No thanks necessary. You earned this long before Marcus's stunt forced my hand." He checked his watch. "Now go home. That's an order from your CEO." The next morning, signing day, dawned clear and bright, a rarity for Seattle in that season. I arrived early, reviewing every detail one last time before the Morrison team arrived. By 10 a.m., everything was in place. The conference room prepared, the contracts arranged, the security protocols active and verified. James Morrison arrived with his team at precisely 10:30, his reputation for punctuality fully intact. He was younger than most people expected for a CEO of his stature, early 40s with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Ms. Parker," he said, shaking my hand. "Michael tells me there was some excitement earlier this week." "Nothing we couldn't handle," I assured him. "Everything is proceeding exactly as we discussed." He studied me for a moment. "Good. I don't like surprises, especially when it comes to partnerships of this magnitude." The signing ceremony went smoothly. Walter and Morrison exchanged the official documents, photographers captured the handshake, and champagne was poured for a toast. I stood slightly to the side, watching the culmination of 6 months of meticulous work. As the celebration continued, Morrison made his way over to me. "Michael told me what really happened," he said quietly. "That you were temporarily removed from your position right before our final meeting." I kept my expression neutral. As I said, it was a miscommunication that's been resolved. "I admire your diplomacy," he said with a small smile. "But you should know, we wouldn't have signed with Meridian if you weren't part of the equation. Your understanding of our security concerns, your attention to detail, that's what convinced me this partnership could work." His words warmed me more than I expected. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." "James, please." He raised his champagne glass slightly. "To good decisions and the people who make them possible." I clinked my glass against his, feeling a sense of completion and vindication that had been building since that terrible moment in Marcus's office. Later that afternoon, Walter called an all-staff meeting to announce the successful partnership with Morrison Technologies, a deal that would increase Meridian's valuation by nearly 30% and open doors to clients who had previously been out of our reach. He thanked everyone involved, but saved special recognition for the architect of this historic partnership, our newly appointed Executive Vice President of Strategic Growth, Alexandra Parker. The applause was genuine and warm. As I looked around at my colleagues, some who had reached out after hearing of my brief departure, others who had remained silent, I felt a complex mixture of pride, gratitude, and determination. I caught sight of Marcus at the back of the room, his expression carefully blank. Our eyes met briefly before he turned and slipped out the door. I knew this wasn't the end of that particular story, but I was no longer afraid of what he might do. I had earned my place at Meridian through years of dedication and results. No one, not even the founder's nephew, could take that away from me again. That evening, as I sat in my office watching the sunset paint the Seattle skyline in shades of gold and purple, Elena knocked on my door. "Congratulations, Executive Vice President," she said with a grin. "Do I need to curtsy now when you walk by?" I laughed. "Only on formal occasions." She sat down across from me. "So, was it worth it? All the drama, the uncertainty?" I considered the question carefully. Was it worth nearly losing everything to gain recognition for what I'd built? Would I go through it all again? "Yes," I said finally. "Not because of the title or the recognition, but because now I know exactly what I'm capable of." "And what's that?" she asked. I smiled, looking out at the city I'd called home for the past decade, at the company I'd helped build from a scrappy startup to an industry leader. "Standing my ground," I replied, "even when the ground is shifting beneath my feet." As I drove home that night, I thought about how quickly life can change, how you can go from fired to promoted in the span of 3 days. I thought about Marcus, and whether he'd learned anything from this experience. Probably not. Men like him rarely do. But I had learned something valuable, that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's assessment. That knowledge, expertise, and integrity matter in the long run, even when they seem to be liabilities in the short term. I had saved a company that had tried to discard me. I had proven my value not through desperation or pleading, but by simply knowing what I was worth and standing firm until others recognized it too. Sometimes being your only hope means first becoming your own champion. That was the real lesson, one I wouldn't forget, no matter what challenges came next. The week after the Morrison deal signing should have been triumphant. The business journals were buzzing about Meridian's strategic coup in securing a partnership that many of our competitors had pursued for years. My inbox was flooded with congratulatory messages from industry peers and old colleagues who had seen the press release announcing both the partnership and my promotion. But beneath the surface, the atmosphere at Meridian was shifting in subtle, unsettling ways. I first noticed it during the executive leadership meeting on Monday morning. As the newest member of the team, I expected some adjustment period. What I didn't expect was the chill that seemed to follow me into the boardroom. Conversations halted when I approached, resuming with forced smiles and redirected topics. I took my seat beside Nadia, our chief financial officer, and someone I'd always considered an ally. "Tough crowd today," I whispered. She gave me a tight smile. "Marcus has been busy." Before I could ask what she meant, Walter called the meeting to order. We proceeded through the agenda: quarterly projections, departmental updates, strategic initiatives, with a strange undercurrent of tension. When it came time to discuss the Morrison implementation, I presented my timeline and resource requirements. "This seems excessive," said Thomas, our head of operations and traditionally one of my strongest supporters. "Do we really need a dedicated security team for one client?" "It's not just for Morrison," I explained, surprised by his pushback. "The protocol we've developed has applications across all our high-security clients. It's an investment in our infrastructure." "An expensive investment," Thomas countered, studying a spreadsheet I hadn't seen before. "According to these projections, your department's budget would increase by 32% this quarter." I frowned. "I haven't submitted those numbers yet. Where did you get that document?" A brief, uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "Marcus provided some preliminary analysis," Walter said, his tone carefully neutral. "For discussion purposes, only, of course." I nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Marcus might have been removed from operational decisions, but he clearly hadn't been sidelined completely. He was still finding ways to influence the conversation and to position me as a drain on resources rather than an asset. "I'd be happy to review those numbers," I said calmly. "They don't align with my actual budget proposal, which I'll distribute this afternoon." The meeting continued, but the damage was done. Seeds of doubt had been planted. I was no longer just Alexandra Parker, architect of the Morrison deal. I was also Alexandra Parker, potential budget risk. As the meeting broke up, Walter caught my eye and gestured for me to stay behind. "That was unexpected," I said once we were alone. Walter sighed, looking suddenly older than his 62 years. "Marcus has been meeting individually with board members and department heads, ostensibly to smooth ruffled feathers after his administrative misstep with you, but actually to undermine me," I finished. "I've spoken to him about it," Walter said, frustration evident in his voice. "But he's careful, never saying anything directly critical, just raising questions, planting doubts. And as a major shareholder's son, he has people's attention." Walter nodded grimly. "Politics, Alex. It's the downside of growth. When we were smaller, we were a family. Now we're a corporation." He squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "But don't worry. Results speak louder than whispers. Once the Morrison implementation succeeds, these concerns will fade." I wasn't so sure. In my experience, perception often trumped reality in corporate environments, but I nodded, thanking Walter for his support. As I returned to my office, Elena intercepted me, her expression troubled. "You've got a meeting request from Philip in IT security," she said, keeping her voice low. "He wants to discuss some inconsistencies in the Morrison protocol documentation." Philip Chen, no relation to Walter, was our IT security director. Brilliant, but notoriously difficult to work with. He'd been skeptical of the Morrison protocol from the beginning, arguing that our existing security framework was sufficient. I'd overruled him, with Walter's backing. "When?" I asked. 20 minutes. His office." I nodded, mentally shifting gears. "Can you pull together the original security specifications we sent to Morrison? And the revision history?" As Elena hurried off, I closed my office door and took a moment to center myself. This wasn't a coincidence, not after the executive meeting. Someone was coordinating an effort to question my work, my judgment, my value to the company. Marcus was more strategic than I'd given him credit for. He wasn't attempting a frontal assault this time. No dramatic firing, no obvious power play. Instead, he was orchestrating a campaign of doubt, using others to chip away at my credibility. Philip's office was in the basement level of our building. He claimed the lack of windows helped him focus, and the stark fluorescent lighting did nothing to soften his perpetual scowl. "Alex," he said without looking up from his monitors, "take a seat if you can find one." Every surface was covered with equipment, printouts, or empty energy drink cans. I cleared a chair and sat down, waiting as Philip finished typing something with ferocious intensity. "So," he said finally, swiveling to face me. "The Morrison protocol. What about it?" He pushed a tablet across his desk. "These access parameters, they're not consistent with our security framework." I reviewed the document. "They're not meant to be. That's the point of a custom protocol. It's tailored to the client's specific requirements." "It creates vulnerabilities," he insisted. "Separate authentication pathways, custom encryption, it's unnecessarily complex." "The complexity is the security," I countered. Morrison's last partnership ended in a data breach precisely because they were integrated into a standard security framework that hackers had already mapped. Philip leaned back, his expression skeptical. "And who's going to maintain this bespoke system? My team is already stretched thin. That's why I've requested budget for a dedicated security team." Ah, yes, the famous budget increase. His tone was knowing, almost smug. "Marcus mentioned you'd be asking for substantial resources." There it was again, Marcus's influence, extending even to the basement offices of IT. "Philip," I said, changing tack, "how long have we worked together?" He blinked, thrown by the question. 5 years, give or take." "In those 5 years, have I ever proposed something that compromised Meridian security or wasted company resources?" He shifted uncomfortably. "No, but..." The Morrison protocol was developed in collaboration with their security team, reviewed by external consultants, and approved by Walter himself. It's unorthodox because it needs to be. Philip was silent for a moment, studying me. "So, why am I suddenly getting requests to find potential issues with it?" "From whom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Marcus sent an email yesterday, said there were concerns at the board level about the implementation risks." I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was seething. The board approved the protocol as part of the partnership agreement. If there are new concerns, they should come through Walter or directly to me. Philip rubbed his eyes tiredly. "Look, I don't want to get caught in executive crossfire. I just need to know that my team won't be blamed if something goes wrong with this custom system." "You have my word," I said. "In fact, I'd like you to be part of the implementation committee. Your expertise would be valuable, and you'd have visibility into every aspect of the process." This was true, but it was also strategic. Philip was influential among the technical teams, and having him on board would help counter the narrative Marcus was trying to build. He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Fine, but I want everything documented and signed off. No verbal approvals, no last-minute changes." "Agreed." I stood to leave, then paused. "And Philip, if you get any more requests that seem politically motivated, I'd appreciate a heads up." He gave me a rare, wry smile. "Office politics. This is why I stay in the basement." As I made my way back upstairs, I mentally took stock of the situation. Marcus was more subtle than I'd expected, working through proxies and planting doubts rather than confronting me directly. It was clever and dangerous. If enough people questioned my judgment or the viability of the Morrison protocol, it could undermine everything I was trying to build. I needed to counter this campaign, but carefully. Direct accusations against the founder's nephew would only make me appear paranoid or vindictive. I needed allies, evidence, and a strategy that would reveal Marcus's manipulations without dragging me down to his level. Back in my office, I found Elena waiting with the requested documents. "How did it go with Philip?" she asked. Better than expected, actually. I quickly explained what had happened. Elena shook her head. Marcus is playing a longer game this time. And using company resources to do it, I said, a new thought occurring to me. Elena, can you discreetly find out how much time Marcus is spending on this? Meetings, emails, calls, anything related to the Morrison protocol or my department. She raised an eyebrow. You think he's neglecting his actual responsibilities? I think he's so focused on undermining me that he might be creating vulnerabilities elsewhere. If he's supposed to be handling investor relations but spending his time lobbying against me internally. I'll see what I can find out, she promised. For the next few days, I focused on building support for the Morrison implementation. I met individually with key stakeholders, addressing concerns, clarifying details, and gradually shifting the narrative. Philip, true to his word, joined the implementation committee and, somewhat to my surprise, became one of its most vocal defenders once he fully understood the technical elegance of the security solution. But Marcus continued his whisper campaign. Rumors circulated about cost overruns and implementation risks. Questions were raised about whether we needed a dedicated executive VP for strategic growth, or if those responsibilities could be distributed among existing departments. Coincidentally, the exact restructuring Marcus had attempted when he fired me. By Thursday, I was exhausted from constantly having to defend my work and my position. I stayed late, revising budget projections and preparing responses to every conceivable objection. The office was nearly empty when Walter appeared in my doorway, coat over his arm. You know, the whole point of a promotion is that you get to leave at a reasonable hour occasionally, he said. I smiled tiredly, just being thorough. He entered, closing the door behind him. Alex, I owe you an apology. I underestimated Marcus's response. He's determined, I agreed. It's more than that. Walter sat heavily in the chair across from my desk. Marcus's position here was always complicated. His mother, my sister, is a major shareholder, but has never been involved in operations. When she pushed for him to join the executive team, I should have been firmer. I'd never heard Walter speak so candidly about the family dynamics behind Meridian. Why weren't you? I asked gently. He was quiet for a long moment. Guilt, perhaps? My success came at a cost to my family. Long hours, missed birthdays, the typical entrepreneur story. My sister resented that, especially after her husband died. Giving Marcus a position here was a way to make amends. And now he feels entitled to more. Walter nodded grimly. The board meeting next week was supposed to be a formality, approving the Morrison implementation plan, confirming your promotion. But Marcus has been lobbying certain board members, particularly those with less technical background. He's positioning himself as the financial pragmatist against our excessive spending. My heart sank. Do you think he'll succeed? Not? If I can help it. Walter's expression hardened. But I need to be careful. Some board members are already questioning whether family dynamics are clouding my judgment, in both directions. If I defend you too forcefully, it could backfire. So what do? We need something irrefutable. Financial projections can be questioned, technical assessments debated. We need concrete evidence that the Morrison protocol is not just necessary, but irreplaceable. I thought for a moment, an idea taking shape. What about a security demonstration? Walter looked intrigued. What kind of demonstration? A controlled test of the Morrison protocol against standard security measures. We could invite key board members and department heads to observe an actual penetration test, showing in real time why the custom approach is necessary. Can you arrange that by Tuesday's board meeting? Yes, I said, already mentally planning the details. But it would be more effective coming from Philip's team rather than mine. It would counter the perception of bias. Walter smiled, some of the tension leaving his face. This is why you're an executive now, Alex. You don't just solve problems, you anticipate them. He stood to leave. Get Philip on board, and I'll make sure the right people attend. After Walter left, I called Philip despite the late hour. To my surprise, he answered immediately. Still at the office? I asked. Some of us actually live here, he replied dryly. What do you need? I explained the security demonstration concept. There was silence on the line for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Philip? I'm thinking, he said. It's not a bad idea. Actually, it's a good one. But it would be more effective if we didn't tell the observers which system was which. A blind test. Even better, I agreed. I'll need resources, he warned, and autonomy to design the test fairly. You'll have both, I promised. This needs to be unimpeachable. Fine. Send me the details tomorrow and I'll start putting it together. The next morning, I arrived early to find Elena already at her desk, a satisfied smile on her face. I've got something, she said, holding up a folder. Marcus has spent approximately 60% of his working hours this week on matters related to your department or the Morrison protocol. Meetings, calls, document requests, all documented. How did you get this information? I asked, impressed and slightly concerned. His assistant owes me a favor, she said with a wink, and I might have volunteered to help organize some departmental activity reports. Nothing unethical, just thorough record-keeping. I took the folder, scanning the contents. This is significant. If he's spending most of his time undermining me instead of managing investor relations. Exactly, Elena finished. He's neglecting his actual responsibilities. And there's more. She lowered her voice. 2 potential investors have been trying to reach him about the Asia-Pacific expansion. He hasn't returned their calls. This was valuable information, perhaps even more damaging than his campaign against me. Marcus was putting his personal vendetta ahead of company interests, potentially jeopardizing Walter's expansion plans. Thank you, Elena, I said sincerely. This helps. Just be careful how you use it, she cautioned. Marcus has friends, in unexpected places. She was right. I needed to be strategic about this information, using it defensively rather than offensively. If I appeared to be attacking Marcus, it would only reinforce his narrative of me as a disruptive force. Over the weekend, I worked closely with Philip to design the security demonstration. We created 2 parallel systems, one using Meridian standard security framework, the other implementing the core elements of the Morrison protocol. Philip assembled a team of ethical hackers to attempt penetration of both systems under controlled conditions, using recently documented attack vectors. By Monday morning, everything was in place. Walter had arranged for key board members and department heads to observe the demonstration the following day, just hours before the board meeting. That would decide the fate of the Morrison implementation, and indirectly, my position. I was reviewing the final preparations when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Need to speak with you urgently. Investor relations matter. Daniel Parks. I frowned. Daniel Parks was one of the investors Elena had mentioned, a potential partner for the Asia-Pacific expansion who had been trying unsuccessfully to reach Marcus. How had he gotten my number? I called Elena. Did you give my contact information to Daniel Parks? No, she said, sounding confused. Why would I do that? He just texted me saying it's urgent. That's strange. Want me to look into it? Please, I said, forwarding her the text, and see if you can confirm it's actually from Parks. 20 minutes later, Elena appeared in my doorway, her expression troubled. It's legitimate. I spoke with his assistant. Mr. Parks has been trying to reach someone at Meridian for days about a time-sensitive opportunity. And Marcus hasn't responded? Apparently not. I considered my options. This wasn't my department or my responsibility. Engaging with an investor Marcus had ignored could be seen as overstepping, exactly the kind of behavior he was trying to paint me with. But if the opportunity was genuinely time-sensitive and valuable to Meridian, set up a call, I decided. But make it clear that I'm taking the meeting only to direct him to the appropriate channels. 30 minutes later, I was speaking with Daniel Parks, a soft-spoken man with impeccable credentials in the tech investment world. "Ms. Parker, thank you for making time," he began. "I've been attempting to reach Meridian for nearly a week." "I understand, Mr. Parks, but investor relations isn't my department." "I'd be happy to." "Yes, I'm aware," he interrupted politely. "But this matter intersects with your expertise. We're considering a significant investment in Meridian's Asia-Pacific expansion, contingent on certain security protocols being implemented across all international operations." My interest sharpened. "What kind of security protocols?" "Similar to what you designed for the Morrison partnership. In fact, it was James Morrison himself who suggested we speak with Meridian. He was quite impressed with your approach." This was unexpected and potentially game-changing. Morrison had referred a major investor based on the very protocol Marcus was trying to undermine. "Mr. Parks, I'd be happy to discuss this further, but I should involve our CEO, Walter Chen. This crosses several departmental boundaries." "Of course," Parks agreed. "Time is somewhat of the essence, however. We're finalizing investment allocations for the quarter by the end of the week." "I understand. Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow afternoon?" We arranged the details, and I immediately called Walter to explain the situation. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. "Let me get this straight," he said finally. "James Morrison referred a major investor to us based on your security protocol. That investor has been trying to reach Marcus for days without success. And now they're on a deadline that could affect our entire Asia-Pacific strategy." "That's correct. And the board meeting to approve the protocol implementation is tomorrow morning." "Also correct." Walter chuckled, a sound I rarely heard from him. "Well, that's rather convenient timing." "I didn't arrange it, if that's what you're implying," I said, a touch defensively. No, he assured me. "I believe in coincidence occasionally, and in karma quite frequently." His tone turned serious. "This is significant, Alex. If Morrison is referring investors based on your work, it validates everything we've been saying about the protocol's importance. Should we postpone the board meeting until after we speak with Parks?" Walter considered this. "No, the security demonstration should still proceed as planned. But I'd like you to prepare a brief statement about the Morrison referral and Parks's interest. Nothing detailed yet, just enough to establish the connection." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Philip conducted final tests of the security demonstration systems. Elena coordinated logistics for both the demonstration and the Parks meeting. I prepared materials for the board, including a carefully worded statement about the Morrison referral. As I was leaving the office that evening, I passed Marcus in the hallway, our first direct encounter since the leadership meeting the previous week. He nodded stiffly, his eyes cold. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "Board meeting, right?" "Among other things," I replied neutrally. "Good luck with that. I hear there are some concerns about implementation costs." "All addressed in the updated proposal," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "Actually, there have been some interesting developments regarding the protocol. James Morrison has apparently been recommending it to others in the industry." I watched his expression carefully, noting the flicker of surprise before his face settled back into practiced indifference. "Is that so?" "Well, recommendations are nice, but the board is more concerned with concrete results." "Of course," I agreed. "Which is why we've arranged a practical demonstration of the protocol's effectiveness tomorrow morning. I believe you received the invitation?" He hadn't, and we both knew it. Walter had deliberately kept Marcus out of the loop on the demonstration, anticipating that he might try to interfere. The momentary confusion on his face was quickly replaced by a tight smile. I must have missed that. I'll have to check my calendar. It's at 9 a.m. in the tech lab, I said helpfully. Just before the board meeting. I'm sure Philip would appreciate your input, given your concerns about the implementation. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'll see if I can make it. I nodded and continued toward the elevator, feeling his eyes on my back. Marcus was rattled, not just by the demonstration he hadn't known about, but by the mention of Morrison's recommendation. His campaign had been built on questioning the value and necessity of the protocol. External validation from a client of Morrison's stature threatened to undermine that narrative. As the elevator doors closed between us, I allowed myself a small, private smile. For the first time since this shadow war began, I felt confident about the outcome. Not because I had outmaneuvered Marcus, though that was satisfying, but because the truth was finally emerging. The protocol worked. It was valuable not just to Morrison, but potentially to other clients and investors. Tomorrow would be about more than office politics or personal vindication. It would be about Meridian's future, about the direction we would take as a company. And I was ready. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, with the calm certainty of someone who had done the work, prepared thoroughly, and had nothing to hide. Whatever happened at the board meeting, I knew I had acted with integrity and in Meridian's best interests throughout. In the morning, I dressed with particular care, choosing a charcoal gray suit that projected both authority and professionalism. As I fastened my mother's silver earrings, a tradition on important days, I thought about how far I'd come from the anxious young consultant who had joined Meridian 7 years ago. That woman would have been devastated by Marcus's tactics, might even have resigned rather than fight. But I had learned through experience that standing your ground wasn't just about personal pride. It was about protecting what you had built, the people who depended on you, and the principles that mattered. When I arrived at the office, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Word of the security demonstration had spread, and people were curious about what would happen. Elena met me at the elevator, her expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Philip's team is ready," she reported as we walked to my office. "The board members are starting to arrive. Walter's with them now." "And Marcus?" A small smile played at her lips. "Arrived 20 minutes ago, looking like he hadn't slept. He's been making calls non-stop. Trying to shore up support before the demonstration," I guessed. Elena nodded. "Too little, too late, if you ask me." I wasn't so sure. Marcus was resourceful and well-connected. Even with the demonstration and the Morrison referral, he might still have enough influence to sway the board against the full implementation. "What about Parks?" I asked. "Any update?" His office confirmed the 2 p.m. meeting. They're sending over some preliminary materials this morning. She handed me a tablet. "Oh, and this just came in from Morrison's team." It was a formal letter of recommendation addressed to Walter, praising the security protocol and specifically mentioning my role in developing it. The timing couldn't have been better, or more suspicious. "Did we request this?" I asked, frowning. Elena shook her head. "Not to my knowledge. It came in unsolicited about an hour ago." This was unexpected. Had Walter reached out to Morrison? Or had someone else at Meridian sought this endorsement? Either way, it was a powerful statement of support just hours before the board meeting. At 8:45, I made my way to the tech lab where the demonstration would take place. The room was already filling with people. Board members, department heads, and key technical staff. Philip was at the front, calmly explaining the setup to a small group that included Walter. Marcus stood near the back, engaged in intense conversation, with Thomas from operations. Walter spotted me and gestured me over. "Alex, perfect timing." We were just discussing the parameters of the demonstration. I joined the group, which included 3 board members I recognized from previous meetings. Philip quickly outlined the test protocol. 2 identical data environments, one protected by Meridian's standard security framework, the other by the Morrison protocol. A team of ethical hackers would attempt to penetrate both systems simultaneously, using recently documented vulnerabilities. The systems are labeled simply as System A and System B, Philip explained. Only Dr. Chen and I know which is which. This ensures complete objectivity in the results. One of the board members, a distinguished woman with a background in banking, looked skeptical. And how will we measure success? What constitutes a better security system? Philip nodded approvingly at the question. We'll track time to penetration, depth of access achieved, and data compromise levels. But the most important metric will be whether the systems can detect and respond to the intrusion attempts in real time. At precisely 9 a.m., the demonstration began. Large screens at the front of the room displayed real-time data from both systems, with intrusion attempts highlighted in red. For the first few minutes, both systems appeared to be holding steady, repelling the initial probes. Then, almost simultaneously, both systems registered more sophisticated attack vectors. System A's defenses began to show strain. Warning indicators flashed as the hackers found and exploited vulnerabilities. Within 12 minutes, they had achieved limited access to non-critical data. By minute 15, they had escalated privileges and were approaching sensitive information. System B, meanwhile, was responding differently. Instead of merely blocking attacks, it was adapting, shifting access points, deploying countermeasures, and most importantly, gathering intelligence about the attack patterns. By minute 20, when System A had been significantly compromised, System B had not only repelled all intrusion attempts, but had begun to trace them back to their source. The room was silent, all eyes fixed on the displays. Even Marcus had stopped, whispering to Thomas, and was watching with a frown of concentration. At the 30-minute mark, Philip called a halt to the demonstration. As you can see, he said, gesturing to the displays, System A has been compromised at multiple levels. Attackers have accessed financial data, client records, and are approaching internal communications. System B has maintained integrity, with no successful penetration. The banking executive leaned forward. And which is which, Standard or Morrison? Philip looked to Walter, who nodded permission. System A is our standard security framework, Philip said. System B is the Morrison protocol. There was a murmur of reaction, surprise from some, vindication from others. I kept my expression carefully neutral, though inside I felt a surge of satisfaction. The demonstration had proven what I had argued all along. The protocol wasn't just different, it was demonstrably superior for high-security applications. This seems conclusive, Walter said into the thoughtful silence that followed. Any questions before we proceed to the board meeting? Marcus stepped forward, his composure recovered. Just one. This demonstration shows the protocol's effectiveness against known attack vectors. But what about the maintenance costs, the ongoing resources required to sustain this level of security? It was a reasonable question, and clearly designed to redirect the conversation back to budgetary concerns, his strongest argument. But before I could respond, Philip surprised me. I've prepared a 3-year projection of maintenance requirements, he said, distributing tablets to the board members. While the initial implementation is resource-intensive, the adaptive nature of the protocol actually reduces long-term maintenance needs compared to our standard framework. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting this support from the traditionally cost-conscious IT security director. These projections assume no significant changes in the threat landscape, he pointed out. Philip nodded. True, but the protocol's adaptive architecture is specifically designed to evolve with emerging threats. That's its core advantage. He turned to address the room at large. As someone initially skeptical of this approach, I feel obligated to state for the record that my technical assessment now fully supports implementation, not just for Morrison, but as an option for all our high-security clients. This was more than I had hoped for. A complete endorsement from the person Marcus had expected to be his strongest technical ally against the protocol. Walter thanked Philip and his team and announced that the board meeting would commence in 30 minutes. As people began to file out, discussing the demonstration in animated groups, I made my way to Philip. "Thank you," I said quietly. That was more support than I expected. He shrugged, a rare smile softening his perpetually serious expression. "I go where the data leads me. The protocol works. It's elegant even. I would have said so regardless of the politics." Coming from Philip, this was high praise indeed. As I turned to leave, I found Marcus standing directly behind me, his expression unreadable. "Impressive demonstration," he said flatly. I'm surprised Philip was so enthusiastic, given his initial reservations. "He's a professional," I replied. When presented with evidence, he adjusted his assessment accordingly. Marcus studied me for a moment. "You know this isn't just about a security protocol, don't you?" "What is it about then?" I asked, genuinely curious about how he viewed our conflict. "Direction," he said. "Vision. Walter built Meridian on personal relationships and technical excellence. But the market is changing. Investors want growth, scalability, predictable returns. Custom solutions like your protocol don't scale efficiently." I considered this. In a way, he was articulating a legitimate strategic difference, one that many tech companies faced as they matured. The tension between customization and standardization, between client-focused solutions and investor-focused metrics. "Maybe it doesn't have to be either or," I suggested. "The protocol demonstrates that innovative, tailored approaches can create unique value. That value translates to client loyalty, referrals, and yes, investor interest, as Daniel Parks' outreach proves." A flicker of surprise crossed his face at the mention of Parks. "You spoke with Parks?" "He reached out yesterday after trying unsuccessfully to contact you. He's interested in our Asia-Pacific expansion, contingent on security protocols similar to what we developed for Morrison." Marcus's expression hardened. "That's my department." "Yes, it is," I agreed. Which is why Walter and I are meeting with him this afternoon to direct him to the proper channels, after we hear what he has to say about the security requirements. For a moment, I thought Marcus might lose his composure entirely. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching at his temple. But he quickly recovered, his face settling into a cold mask of professional courtesy. "I'll make sure to attend that meeting," he said, "since it involves my department." "Of course," I said smoothly. "Walter's office, 2 p.m. As Marcus walked away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction at having unsettled him, concern about the upcoming board meeting, and a certain weariness at the continuing conflict. This wasn't how I wanted to spend my time at Meridian, engaged in internal power struggles instead of building client relationships and innovative solutions. But I also recognized that this was, in many ways, a defining moment for the company. The choice between Marcus's vision and mine represented more than a personal rivalry. It was about Meridian's future identity. Would we prioritize standardization and scale, or continue to value customization and client-focused innovation? The board meeting would be the first indication of which direction they would choose, and I was determined to make the strongest case possible for the path I believed in, not just for my sake, but for everything Meridian could become. The boardroom at Meridian had always felt like a theater to me, with its polished mahogany table, ergonomic chairs arranged like audience seating, and the subtle spotlighting that drew all eyes to whoever was speaking. Today, that theatrical quality was heightened by the tension vibrating through the room as board members settled into their places, tablets and notebooks arranged before them with military precision. I sat to Walter's right, a position that wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus was further down the table, flanked by Thomas from operations and another executive I recognized as a longtime family friend of the Chens. The remaining seats were filled by board members, some I knew well from previous presentations, others more distant figures who rarely engaged with day-to-day operations. Walter called the meeting to order with his characteristic efficiency. As you all know, we're here to discuss the implementation of the Morrison security protocol and its potential expansion to other high-security clients. You've all witnessed this morning's demonstration and received the technical assessment from our IT security team. He nodded to me, and I took my cue, standing to address the board. I had prepared extensively for this moment, anticipating every possible objection and question. What I hadn't fully appreciated was how the energy in the room had shifted after the morning's demonstration. There was curiosity now, an openness that hadn't been there during the previous week's executive meeting. The Morrison protocol represents more than just a security solution for a single client, I began. It establishes a new paradigm for how Meridian approaches high-value partnerships. Rather than offering standardized solutions that clients must adapt to, we've created a framework that adapts to their specific needs and vulnerabilities. I walked them through the technical advantages demonstrated that morning, then pivoted to the business implications, how the protocol could be tailored for other industries with similar security concerns, from healthcare to finance to government contracts. Most importantly, I continued, this approach has already garnered industry attention. James Morrison has personally recommended our security solution to others, including Daniel Parks, who reached out yesterday about a potential investment in our Asia-Pacific expansion. This revelation caused a stir among the board members. One of them, an older gentleman named Richard Hayes, who had been with Meridian since its early days, leaned forward. You're saying Morrison is actively referring us based on this protocol? That's significant. Yes, I confirmed. Mr. Parks indicated that security implementation was a key factor in his investment considerations. He specifically mentioned our work with Morrison as the reason for his interest. Walter distributed copies of Morrison's recommendation letter, which arrived with perfect timing for the meeting. As the board members reviewed it, I caught Marcus shifting uncomfortably in his seat. This endorsement is certainly impressive, said Diane Winters, the banking executive who had asked the pointed questions during the demonstration. But I'm still concerned about the resource allocation. Implementing this protocol more broadly would require significant investment that might be directed toward other growth initiatives. This was Marcus's opening. He cleared his throat, all eyes turning to him. Thank you, Diane. That's precisely the point I've been trying to make. While the protocol is technically sound, as this morning's demonstration showed, we need to consider the opportunity cost. The proposed implementation would redirect resources from our Asia-Pacific expansion, potentially delaying our market entry by months. It was a clever angle, positioning himself as the guardian of Walter's international vision while painting me as focused on a single, resource-intensive initiative. Actually, I countered, the protocol and the expansion aren't competing priorities. They're complementary. The primary concern potential partners have expressed about our Asia-Pacific strategy is data security across international boundaries. The protocol directly addresses those concerns. Marcus smiled thinly. That's speculative. We have concrete timelines and revenue projections for the expansion that would be jeopardized by this diversion of resources. I was about to respond when Walter interjected. Perhaps we should hear directly from potential partners on this matter. As Alex mentioned, we have a meeting with Daniel Parks this afternoon specifically about security requirements for the expansion. He turned to the board. I propose we table the final decision until after that meeting. If Parks confirms that security implementation is critical to his investment, that would significantly impact our resource allocation decisions. Richard Hayes nodded thoughtfully. That seems reasonable. We should have all the facts before making a decision of this magnitude. There were murmurs of agreement around the table. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor, but I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. The delay wasn't what he wanted. He'd been counting on pushing through a decision before the Parks meeting could influence the board. The remainder of the meeting covered other business matters, but the tension never fully dissipated. When Walter finally adjourned, with a decision to reconvene at 3:30 after the Parks meeting, I felt both relief and apprehension. We'd gained time, but the stakes for the afternoon meeting had just increased exponentially. As people filed out, Marcus approached me directly for the first time since our hallway encounter. "Clever move," he said quietly. "Using an unconfirmed investor interest to delay the decision." "It's not unconfirmed," I replied. "Parks reached out. That's a fact. His interest in the security protocol is a fact. The only question is how central that protocol is to his investment decision. And convenient that we'll find out just hours after the initial board vote was scheduled." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Walter's protection can only take you so far, Alex. Eventually, the board will see that your pet projects are distracting from our core growth strategy." Before I could respond, Elena appeared at my side. "Alex, Philip needs a quick word before your next meeting." Marcus nodded curtly and moved away. I turned to Elena with a questioning look. "Philip doesn't actually need you," she admitted, in a low voice. "But you looked like you could use an exit strategy." I smiled gratefully. "You read that situation perfectly. What's the mood out there?" "Mixed," she said as we walked toward my office. "The demonstration made an impression, but Marcus has been working the room since the meeting ended. He's focusing on the board members with financial backgrounds, emphasizing investment returns and capital efficiency." "And the Parks meeting?" "Still on for 2 p.m. His team sent over some preliminary materials." She handed me a tablet. "I've flagged the sections related to security requirements." I spent the next hour reviewing Parks's materials and preparing for the meeting. His investment firm specialized in technology expansion into Asian markets, with a particular focus on companies that maintained rigorous security standards across international operations. The materials included detailed questions about how Meridian would handle data protection, regulatory compliance, and threat monitoring across different jurisdictions. Walter joined me for lunch in my office, both of us too focused on the upcoming meeting to waste time in the company cafeteria. Parks's questions align perfectly with what the Morrison protocol was designed to address, I noted, showing him the flagged sections. Walter nodded, thoughtfully chewing a bite of sandwich. "It's a good sign, but we need to be careful not to oversell. If we promise security capabilities we can't deliver quickly, it could backfire." "Agreed. The protocol can be adapted for international operations, but it would require additional development." "Which means additional resources," Walter said, bringing us back to the board's primary concern. We discussed strategy for the meeting, agreeing that Walter would focus on the broader expansion vision while I addressed the technical aspects of security implementation. We anticipated that Marcus would emphasize his investor relations role and potentially try to minimize the security concerns. At 1:45, we gathered in Walter's office for a final preparation session. Marcus arrived precisely on time, immaculately dressed and outwardly composed, though I noticed a certain tightness around his eyes that betrayed his tension. "I've reviewed Parks's materials," he said without preamble. "His security questions are standard due diligence for any technology investment. We shouldn't overinterpret them as special interest in the Morrison protocol." "Standard or not, they need compelling answers," Walter replied. "And the protocol provides those answers." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "My team has prepared comprehensive responses based on our existing security framework. There's no need to complicate the discussion with experimental approaches." "The demonstration this morning proved it's more than experimental," I pointed out. And Morrison's recommendation suggests it could be a competitive advantage. Before Marcus could respond, Walter's assistant announced that Daniel Parks had arrived. The three of us instinctively shifted into professional mode, setting aside our internal disagreements as Walter went to greet our visitor. Daniel Parks was younger than I had expected, early 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and an understated manner that belied his reputation as one of the shrewdest technology investors in the Pacific Rim. He was accompanied by a woman he introduced as May, Lynn, his technical advisor. After introductions and pleasantries, we settled around Walter's conference table. Parks wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. Mr. Chen, Meridian's expansion strategy is impressive on paper. You've identified key markets, established preliminary partnerships, and structured a phased approach that minimizes capital risk. But there's one aspect that requires more detail: your security infrastructure across international boundaries. Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Parks, I can assure you that Meridian takes data security extremely seriously. Our current framework has successfully protected client information across North American and European operations for years. Parks nodded politely. I don't doubt your commitment, Mr. Foster, but Asian markets present unique challenges, not just technical, but regulatory and sometimes political. Standard Western security approaches often fail to address these nuances. He turned to Walter. James Morrison mentioned that you've developed an innovative security protocol for his operations. He was quite enthusiastic about its adaptive capabilities. Walter gestured to me. Alexandra Parker led that development. She can explain how the protocol might be adapted for international operations. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined the core principles of the Morrison protocol and how they could be extended to address the specific challenges Parks had identified. Mei Lin asked incisive technical questions that revealed her deep expertise in international security compliance. The key advantage, I explained, is that the protocol was designed to be modular. We can adapt specific components to address regional regulations while maintaining consistent core security across all operations. Parks listened intently, occasionally making notes. And the implementation timeline? Morrison indicated his protocol was fully operational within 3 months of signing. That's correct, I confirmed. We would expect similar efficiency for the Asia-Pacific implementation, with provisions for regional customization. Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, interjected. That timeline assumes significant resource allocation, resources currently designated for other aspects of the expansion. Such as? Parks asked directly. Marcus seemed momentarily thrown by the directness of the question. Market analysis, partnership development, regulatory compliance. All critical components, Parks acknowledged. But without robust security infrastructure, those investments would be at risk. We've seen too many companies expand rapidly into Asian markets only to face devastating breaches that destroy client trust and trigger regulatory penalties. He turned to Walter. To be frank, Mr. Chen, the security protocol Ms. Parker has described would be a decisive factor in our investment decision. Standard security frameworks simply don't address the specific challenges we've encountered in these markets. The significance of this statement hung in the air. Parks was essentially confirming everything I had told the board, that the protocol wasn't just a technical preference, but a business necessity for the expansion strategy. Walter nodded thoughtfully. Implementation would require additional resources. We're currently discussing those allocations with our board. I understand, Parks said. But from an investor's perspective, those resources would be well spent. In fact, we would be willing to increase our initial investment by 15% to ensure proper implementation of the security protocol across all regional operations. This was unexpected and potentially game-changing. Parks was offering additional capital specifically tied to the protocol implementation, effectively neutralizing the resource allocation concerns that had been Marcus's strongest argument. The remainder of the meeting focused on details of the potential investment structure and timeline. Throughout the discussion, Marcus maintained his professional demeanor, but I could see the subtle signs of his growing frustration, the tightening of his grip on his pen, the occasional clenching of his jaw. When Parks and Mei Lin departed, just after 3, promising a formal investment proposal within 48 hours, Walter closed his office door and turned to face us. "Well," he said, "that was illuminating." Marcus was the first to speak. "Parks is clearly impressed with the Morrison protocol, but we need to be careful about allowing a single investor to dictate our technical strategy." "He's not dictating," I countered. "He's confirming what we already determined independently, that the protocol addresses critical security needs for high-value operations, and offering additional capital to support its implementation," Walter added. "That changes the resource allocation equation significantly." Marcus shook his head. "It complicates our expansion strategy. We've spent months planning a phased approach that balances growth with capital efficiency. Shifting resources to an accelerated protocol implementation disrupts that balance. Or enhances it," I suggested. "With Parks's additional investment, we could maintain the original expansion timeline while implementing the enhanced security in parallel." Walter checked his watch. "The board reconvenes in 20 minutes. They'll want to hear about Parks's response and his offer of additional investment." He looked at Marcus. "I need to know where you stand. Can you support the protocol implementation given this new information?" It was a critical moment, Walter giving Marcus an opportunity to align himself with the emerging consensus rather than continuing his opposition, a chance to save face and preserve his position within the company. For a moment, I thought he might take it. Something flickered in his eyes, a recognition perhaps that his campaign against the protocol had lost its momentum. But then, his expression hardened. "I maintain that this is a diversion from our core strategy," he said stiffly. "Parks's interest is welcome, but we shouldn't restructure our entire approach based on one potential investor's preferences." Walter sighed, disappointment evident in his face. "I see. Then we'll present both perspectives to the board and let them decide." As we walked to the boardroom, I felt no triumph in Marcus's continued opposition. If anything, I was saddened by his inability to adapt, to recognize when a strategic pivot was necessary. It reminded me of something Walter had said to me years ago. "The most dangerous thing in business isn't making mistakes. It's clinging to them after better information emerges." The board members were already seated when we arrived, an air of expectancy in the room. Walter opened the reconvened meeting with a summary of the Parks discussion, including the offer of increased investment specifically for security implementation. "In light of this development," he concluded, "I believe we should proceed with the full implementation of the Morrison protocol, both for existing high-security clients and as a core component of our Asia-Pacific expansion strategy." Richard Hayes, the longtime board member, looked thoughtful. "This does seem to address the resource allocation concerns raised earlier. If Parks is willing to increase his investment specifically for this purpose, the financial impact on other initiatives would be minimal." Marcus cleared his throat. "With respect, we should consider the precedent this sets. Are we prepared to adjust our technical strategy based on individual investor preferences? What happens when the next investor has different priorities?" Diane Winters shook her head. "This isn't about investor preference, Marcus. It's about market validation. First Morrison, now Parks, both confirming that this security approach addresses a genuine need. That's not preference, that's opportunity recognition." The discussion continued for another 30 minutes, with board members raising questions and concerns. Throughout, I presented detailed answers about implementation, timelines, resource requirements, and the technical capabilities of the protocol. Marcus maintained his opposition, but his arguments had lost their earlier force in the face of Parks's endorsement and offer of additional capital. Finally, Walter called for a decision. We have two options before us. Proceed with full implementation of the Morrison protocol as outlined in Alexandra's proposal, or maintain our current security framework with targeted enhancements as suggested by Marcus. Given the information presented today, including the technical demonstration and investor feedback, I recommend we approve the full implementation. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 7 in favor, 2 opposed. The Morrison Protocol would be implemented across all high-security clients and integrated into the Asia-Pacific expansion strategy. As the meeting concluded, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Professional satisfaction, certainly. The board had recognized the value of the work my team and I had developed, but also a certain heaviness about the continued conflict with Marcus. This victory would not end our struggle. If anything, it might intensify it. Walter seemed to read my thoughts as we walked back to his office. "He won't give up easily," he said quietly. "I know, but neither will I." Walter smiled faintly. This was never just about a security protocol for him. It was about establishing his vision for Meridian's future. A vision different from mine and from yours. Do you think he can accept the board's decision and move forward constructively? Walter was silent for a moment. I want to believe he can. He's family, after all. He sighed. But Marcus has always struggled with adversity. He expects things to come easily, to go his way because of who he is, rather than what he's earned. We reached his office, and Walter paused at the door. "Be careful, Alex. Today's vote was a setback for him, but it won't be the end. Watch for subtle retaliation, delayed resources, undermined authority, isolated incidents that are difficult to attribute directly to him." "I'm already watching," I assured him, "and documenting everything." He nodded approvingly. "Good. In the meantime, we have work to do. Parks will send his formal proposal soon, and the protocol implementation needs to begin immediately." For the remainder of the day, I focused on next steps, organizing my team, coordinating with Philip in IT security, and preparing communications for our other high-security clients about the enhanced protocol availability. Elena helped me draft a preliminary implementation timeline that we could share with Parks as soon as his formal proposal arrived. It was nearly 7 p.m. when I finally packed up to leave. The office had grown quiet, most employees having departed hours earlier. As I waited for the elevator, I heard footsteps approaching and turned to find Marcus walking toward me, his expression unreadable. "Long day," he commented, stopping a few feet away. "Productive, though," I replied neutrally. He nodded slowly. "Congratulations on the board vote. You presented your case well." The unexpected civility threw me momentarily. "Thank you. I hope we can work together effectively on the implementation. Your insights on investor expectations would be valuable." "Of course," he said, his tone pleasant but distant. "After all, we both want what's best for Meridian." The elevator arrived, doors sliding open with a soft chime. Marcus gestured for me to enter first, a courteous gesture that nevertheless made me vaguely uneasy. As we descended in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that his apparent acceptance was tactical rather than genuine. When we reached the lobby, he turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good night, Alex. Looking forward to our collaboration." I watched him walk away across the marble expanse of the lobby, his posture perfect, his pace unhurried. The sudden shift from open opposition to cordial professionalism was jarring and suspicious. Marcus hadn't struck me as someone who accepted defeat gracefully, particularly when it came so publicly. Outside, the Seattle evening was unexpectedly clear, the setting sun casting long shadows across the downtown streets. I took a deep breath of the fresh air, letting the tensions of the day begin to dissipate. Whatever Marcus was planning, and I was certain he was planning something, I would deal with it when it came. For now, I had won a significant victory, For my vision of Meridian's future, secured board support for the protocol implementation, and potentially advanced Walter's Asia-Pacific expansion with a valuable new investor. Not bad for someone who had been fired just a few weeks ago. The next morning, Elena greeted me with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "You've made an impression," she said, nodding toward my office. Inside, I found a large arrangement of orchids, Walter's traditional gesture of appreciation for significant contributions to the company. The card read simply, "Vision vindicated. Well done. Walter." The morning was a flurry of activity. Parks's formal investment proposal arrived, confirming his interest in Meridian's expansion and his commitment of additional capital for the security protocol implementation. The proposal included a 90-day timeline for initial security deployment across key Asian markets, ambitious but achievable with proper resource allocation. Philip's team began technical preparations for the expanded protocol deployment, with Philip himself joining my department's morning meeting to coordinate. "I've assigned our 3 best security architects to this project," he told me. "This implementation is going to set a new standard for international data protection." By mid-morning, I had drafted a comprehensive implementation plan that integrated the technical requirements from Philip's team with the business timelines from the expansion strategy. The plan included detailed resource allocations, milestone targets, and communication protocols for both internal teams and external partners. Walter approved the plan immediately, and by noon, I had distributed role assignments to my team members. The energy in the department was electric, a combination of validation after the previous week's uncertainty and excitement about the high-profile implementation ahead. Throughout the day, I kept expecting some sign of Marcus's counterattack, a scheduling conflict, a resource dispute, some bureaucratic obstacle to the implementation kickoff. But there was nothing. If anything, his department was being unusually responsive, providing requested information promptly and offering assistance with investor communications. "It's strange," I commented to Elena as the day wound down. "Marcus seems to have accepted the decision completely." She looked skeptical. "Maybe, or maybe he's taking a longer view." "What do you mean?" "Success is the best revenge, right? If he can't stop the protocol implementation, maybe he's focusing on making sure it doesn't succeed, or at least doesn't succeed as well as it could." It was a concerning thought, but plausible. Marcus wouldn't need to actively sabotage the implementation. He could simply withhold crucial support at key moments, introduce delays that seemed reasonable individually, but cumulatively jeopardized the timeline or set expectations with investors that would be difficult to meet. "Keep an eye on communications from his team," I told Elena, "particularly anything related to investor expectations or resource allocations." She nodded. "Already on it, and I've set up regular check-ins with Walter's assistant. If Marcus is meeting with investors or board members without you or Walter, Present will know." The next several days passed in a blur of activity. The protocol implementation team was assembled, with specialists from multiple departments working under my direction. Philip's security architects began adapting the core protocol for international deployment, while my team coordinated with regional partners to understand local regulatory requirements. Marcus remained professionally cordial whenever our paths crossed, offering appropriate support from his department but maintaining a certain distance. Walter watched these interactions with cautious optimism, hopeful that his nephew had accepted the board's decision and was finding a constructive role in the implementation. By the end of the week, we had made significant progress. The technical architecture for the international protocol was taking shape, with innovative solutions for the specific challenges Parks had identified. Initial communications with our Asia-Pacific partners had been well received, with several expressing particularly strong interest in the enhanced security capabilities. On Friday afternoon, Walter stopped by my office. Parks called. He's impressed with our response time and the preliminary designs his technical team has reviewed. He's bringing in additional advisors next week to do a deeper assessment. That's excellent news. We'll be ready." Walter nodded, then hesitated. He also mentioned that Marcus reached out to him directly yesterday, apparently to discuss investment structure options. I felt a flicker of concern. Without coordinating with us first? What kind of options? Parks wasn't specific, but he seemed to think Marcus was exploring alternatives to the full protocol implementation. Options that would achieve similar security outcomes with less resource intensity. And there it was, the first indication of Marcus's revised strategy. Not direct opposition, but a parallel track that could potentially undermine the approach the board had approved. "That's concerning," I said carefully. The board was clear about approving the full implementation. Alternative approaches weren't part of the decision. Walter's expression was troubled. "I know. I've asked Marcus to meet with me on Monday to explain." In the meantime, I suggested to Parks that all technical discussions should continue through you and your team to maintain consistency. After Walter left, I sat at my desk considering this new development. Marcus was being more subtle than I had anticipated, not openly defying the board's decision, but quietly working to create an alternative path that aligned more closely with his vision. It was clever and potentially dangerous if left unchecked. I called Elena in. "We need to accelerate our timeline. If Parks' technical advisors are coming next week, I want them to see significant progress on the exact implementation the board approved, making any alternative approach seem unnecessary and disruptive." She nodded. "I'll adjust the schedules." "What about Marcus's outreach to Parks?" "Document it, but don't confront Marcus directly. Let Walter handle that conversation on Monday. In the meantime, we focus on making our implementation so compelling that any alternative seems inferior." The weekend passed in a flurry of work, with my team and Philip's security architects putting in extra hours to prepare for the technical review. By Sunday evening, we had a working prototype of the International Protocol extension, not fully implemented, but functioning enough to demonstrate the core capabilities that had impressed Parks initially. On Monday morning, I arrived at the ETE office early to find Elena already at her desk, a concerned expression on her face. "What is it?" I asked. "Walter's meeting with Marcus has been postponed. Apparently, Marcus had to fly to New York last night for an urgent investor meeting and won't be back until Wednesday." The timing was suspicious, conveniently missing both Walter's questioning and the initial meetings with Parks' technical advisors. "Did he say which investors?" Elena shook her head. His assistant was vague, something about exploring additional capital options for the expansion. This was more than just parallel planning. It was potentially an attempt to restructure the entire investment approach behind the expansion. If Marcus could secure alternative funding that wasn't tied to the security protocol, he could undermine Parks' leverage and, by extension, the implementation the board had approved. I needed to act quickly, but carefully. Direct accusation without evidence would only make me appear paranoid or threatened. Instead, I needed to ensure that the protocol implementation was so clearly superior and so far advanced that any alternative would seem like a step backward. "We proceed as planned," I told Elena. "Parks' technical team arrives tomorrow, and we'll give them the most comprehensive review possible. Make sure Philip and his architects are fully prepared." She nodded. "And Marcus?" I considered this carefully. "Let's document everything. His absence, any communications from his team, any changes to investor discussions. But our focus remains on execution. The best response to whatever he's planning is to make the protocol implementation an undeniable success." As I settled at my desk to review the final preparations for tomorrow's meetings, I felt a renewed determination. Marcus might have shifted his tactics from open opposition to subtle undermining, but the fundamental conflict remained the same. Two competing visions for Meridian's future, two different approaches to growth and innovation. The board had chosen my vision and I was determined to vindicate their decision, not just for my own position, but for the company's long-term success. Whatever Marcus was planning in New York, whatever alternative approaches he was developing, I would meet them, with results that couldn't be denied or diminished. The game had changed, but the stakes remained the same, and I was more committed than ever to seeing it through to the end. Tuesday morning dawned with a Seattle drizzle that matched my mood, cautiously optimistic, but braced for complications. Parks' technical advisors were scheduled to arrive at 10 a.m. for a full-day review of our implementation plan. Without Marcus present to run interference, we had a clear opportunity to cement their confidence in our approach. I arrived at Charchi, the office just after 7, wanting time to review everything one last time before the presentations began. The security lab where we'd be conducting the technical demonstrations was already bustling with activity. Philip's team making final adjustments to the prototype, my team arranging documentation and presentation materials. "Everything on schedule?" I asked Philip, who was hunched over a keyboard muttering to himself. He looked up, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd worked through the night. "We're ready. The international authentication module is operating at 92% efficiency, better than we projected for this stage. And the regional compliance adaptations?" He gestured to a screen displaying a complex matrix of regulatory requirements mapped against protocol functions. All primary compliance markers are green, secondary markers at 83% with clear implementation paths for the remainder. It was impressive work, especially given the compressed timeline. "The technical team will be looking for vulnerabilities," I warned, "particularly in cross-jurisdiction data transfers." Philip nodded, a hint of professional pride in his tired eyes. "Let them look. We've stress-tested every pathway. There are still optimizations to make, but the architecture is sound." I squeezed his shoulder in thanks and moved on to check in with my team. Elena had organized the day's schedule with military precision: technical reviews in the morning, business implementation discussions over lunch, and strategic integration sessions in the afternoon. Each segment had clear objectives, all building toward our ultimate goal: unwavering confirmation that our approach was the right one for Meridian's expansion. At 9:45, Walter arrived with Daniel Parks and his technical team, 3 specialists with impressive credentials in international security architecture. Mei Lin, whom we'd met previously, was accompanied by Dr. Takashi Yamamoto, a renowned expert in Asia-Pacific regulatory compliance, and Raj Patel, whose background in penetration testing made him a formidable evaluator of security protocols. After introductions and coffee, we led them to the security lab for the morning's technical reviews. Philip took the lead, walking them through the core architecture of the international protocol extension with a clarity that belied its complexity. I watched their reactions carefully, the slight widening of Yamamoto's eyes when Philip demonstrated the adaptive compliance engine, the approving nod from Patel as the system repelled a simulated attack vector. "The modular approach is particularly elegant," Mei Lin commented as Philip concluded his presentation. "Most security systems we evaluate require complete reconfiguration for each regional implementation. This maintains consistency while allowing for necessary adaptations." "That was our primary design objective," I explained. "Consistency of core security with flexibility for local requirements." Patel leaned forward, his expression both impressed and skeptical. "The architecture is promising, but I'm concerned about implementation timelines. These systems typically take 6 to 12 months to fully deploy. You're proposing 90 days for initial implementation." I had anticipated this concern. "We've developed an accelerated deployment methodology based on our experience with the Morrison implementation." I brought up a detailed project timeline on the main screen. By paralleling certain development tracks and leveraging pre-built modules from the core protocol, we can achieve functional implementation within the 90-day window, with optimizations continuing in subsequent phases. The morning proceeded with increasingly technical discussions, with Philip and his team fielding complex questions about encryption methods, authentication pathways, and threat response mechanisms. Throughout, Parks observed quietly, occasionally, making notes but mostly watching how his team interacted with ours. By lunchtime, the atmosphere had shifted from professional evaluation to collaborative problem-solving. Yamamoto and Philip were deep in conversation about regulatory algorithms for the Japanese market. Patel was working directly with one of our security architects on advanced penetration testing scenarios. Even the typically reserved Mei Lin was enthusiastically discussing implementation strategies with members of my team. As we moved to the executive dining room for lunch, Parks fell into step beside me. "Impressive progress," he said quietly. "Your team has accomplished in days what most would require weeks to prepare." "We're motivated," I replied. "The Asia-Pacific expansion represents a transformative opportunity for Meridian." He nodded thoughtfully. "I spoke with Marcus Foster yesterday. He seemed to have some alternative perspectives on the implementation approach." Here it was, the opening to address Marcus's parallel planning directly. I chose my words carefully. "Marcus brings valuable insights on investor relations. However, the board has approved a specific implementation strategy based on demonstrated technical success and market validation. That's the plan we're executing." Parks studied me for a moment. He mentioned concerns about resource allocation and timeline feasibility. "Those concerns were thoroughly addressed in the board review," I said confidently. "The additional investment you've proposed specifically mitigates the resource constraints. As for timelines, this morning's demonstrations should confirm our capability to meet the proposed milestones." "They have," he acknowledged. "Quite convincingly, in fact, which makes Marcus's suggestions somewhat puzzling." I maintained my professional demeanor, though internally I was carefully calculating how to proceed. "May I ask what specifically he suggested?" "A phased approach with initial implementation limited to less stringent security requirements, expanding to full protocol implementation over 12-18 months rather than 90 days. He positioned it as more financially prudent." It was worse than I'd feared. Marcus wasn't just suggesting tweaks to the implementation. He was proposing a fundamental restructuring that would delay full security deployment well beyond the critical initial expansion phase. It was a strategy that served his vision of standardization over customization, regardless of the security implications. That approach wasn't presented to or approved by the board, I said, my tone measured, but firm. More importantly, it wouldn't provide the security foundation necessary for successful market entry, as your own technical team seems to be confirming this morning. Parks nodded slowly. I found it curious that he would propose such significant changes without coordinating with you or Walter. It suggested a certain disconnect in your executive alignment. The diplomatic phrasing barely concealed his real concern: internal conflict that could jeopardize implementation success. I needed to address this directly without appearing defensive. Meridian, like any growing company, benefits from diverse perspectives, I said. The board considered multiple approaches before approving our current strategy. That decision represents our official direction. Walter and I are fully aligned on its execution, and Marcus's team will provide necessary support for investor relations aspects. Whether Parks was convinced by this explanation was difficult to gauge, but he seemed satisfied enough to move the conversation forward as we joined the others for lunch. The afternoon sessions focused on business implementation, how the security protocol would integrate with partner systems, support client relationships, and enable Meridian's expansion strategy. By the time Parks and his team departed at 5:30, we had achieved our primary objective. They were visibly impressed with our progress and convinced of our approach. Parks confirmed as much in his closing remarks. Based on today's review, we're prepared to proceed with the investment as outlined in our proposal. The technical foundation is sound, The implementation approach is credible, and the business alignment is clear. He shook my hand warmly. We'll have the final paperwork to you by Friday. After they left, Walter turned to me with a rare, broad smile. Well done, Alex. Truly exceptional work. Thank you, but it was a team effort. Philip and his architects deserve much of the credit. Walter nodded in agreement. Absolutely. But your leadership made it possible, especially given the complications. His expression turned more serious. Parks mentioned Marcus made some alternative suggestions. We'll need to address that when he returns. Tomorrow, according to his assistant, I confirmed. Did you reschedule your meeting with him? For Thursday morning. I want the Parks investment agreement in hand first. Walter's strategy was clear. Confront Marcus with the finalized agreement that rendered his alternative approach moot. The next morning, I called my team together to celebrate our success and outline next steps. We were reviewing implementation assignments when Elena slipped into the conference room, her expression troubled. She handed me a note. Marcus back. Uri, meeting with BD team now. Walter wants to see you ASAP. I kept my face neutral as I wrapped up the meeting, then headed directly to Walter's office. He was standing at the window, tension evident in his posture. Marcus returned last night, he said without preamble. He's called an alignment meeting with the business development team to discuss implementation coordination for the Asia-Pacific expansion. Without inviting either of us? I asked, though the answer was obvious. Precisely. His assistant characterized it as preliminary planning that would be shared with executive leadership afterward. Walter turned to face me. He's building a parallel implementation track, Alex, one that aligns with his vision rather than the board-approved strategy. Can you stop the meeting? Walter shook his head grimly, not without creating a very public confrontation that would undermine confidence in our executive stability, exactly when Parks is finalizing his investment. He was right. A public power struggle now would send exactly the wrong message, potentially jeopardizing the Parks deal and, by extension, the entire expansion strategy. So we let the meeting proceed, I said, thinking quickly. But we need to know exactly what he's telling them. Did he bring something back from New York that's emboldened this move? That's what concerns me. His assistant mentioned alternative investment structures he was exploring. If he's found another investor willing to support his approach. The implications were serious. The board had approved our implementation strategy with Parks' investment as a key factor. If Marcus had secured alternative funding that didn't require the full security protocol implementation, it could reopen the entire decision. We need someone in that meeting, I said. Walter nodded. Already arranged. Jason from my office was invited. They need his input on executive reporting structures. He'll provide us with a full briefing afterward. The rest of the morning passed in a strange limbo of continuing our implementation work while waiting for news from Marcus's meeting. I met with Philip to review the technical feedback from Parks' team, but my mind kept returning to what might be happening just a few floors away. Just after noon, Elena came to my office. Jason's out of the meeting. He's briefing Walter now. I found them in Walter's office, Jason looking uncomfortable as he reported what he'd witnessed. As I entered, Walter gestured for me to take a seat. Continue, he said to Jason. As I was saying, Mr. Foster presented what he called an implementation refinement for the Asia-Pacific expansion. He positioned it as a way to accelerate market entry while managing security deployment in a more capital-efficient manner. The same phased approach he suggested to Parks, I noted. Jason nodded. He referenced conversations with alternative investment partners who were prepared to support this refined approach with comparable capital commitments to Parks, but with more flexible implementation requirements. Walter's expression darkened. Did he name these investors? No, sir. He said discussions were at a sensitive stage and confidentiality was required until terms were finalized. And how did the BD team respond? I asked. Jason shifted uncomfortably. They seemed receptive. Mr. Foster emphasized that his approach would allow them to focus on market development without being constrained by excessive security implementation. Timelines. Of course they were receptive. Marcus was offering them exactly what they wanted: faster market entry without the complexity of integrating advanced security protocols. It was a seductive narrative for the business development. Teams, who were evaluated on market penetration timelines rather than long-term security resilience. He's creating a constituency for his approach, Walter said grimly. If the BD team aligns with his refinement, it puts pressure on the board to reconsider, especially if he really does have alternative investors waiting. Did he say anything about the board's previous decision? I asked Jason. Only that additional information had emerged that warranted a reassessment. He characterized the refinement as an evolution of the approved strategy rather than a replacement. It was clever positioning, not directly challenging the board's authority, but suggesting that circumstances had changed sufficiently to justify a revised approach. And by building support within the BD team before presenting to Walter or me, Marcus was creating internal momentum that would be difficult to counter without appearing obstructionist. After Jason left, Walter and I considered our options. We could confront him directly, Walter suggested. Demand to see details of these alternative investors, and remind him that major strategic changes require board approval. That's exactly what he wants, I countered. A confrontation that makes this about executive authority rather than the substance of the implementation approach. If we force the issue, he portrays us as rigid and controlling, himself as innovative and adaptable. Walter sighed, acknowledging the trap. So, what do you suggest? I thought carefully. We need to shift the terrain of the debate. This isn't about executive authority or even implementation timelines. It's about security effectiveness. If his refinement can't deliver the security necessary for successful expansion, then it doesn't matter what alternative investors might support it. A technical assessment, Walter nodded slowly, comparing his approach to ours based on objective security criteria. Exactly. Philip's team could conduct an independent evaluation of both approaches. If the results clearly show that our implementation provides superior security, as I'm confident they would, it undermines Marcus's entire position. Walter considered this. It could work, but we'd need details of his approach first, which he hasn't shared with us. So we request them formally, not as a challenge, but as part of normal coordination procedures. If he refuses, that becomes the issue rather than the substance of his proposal. We agreed on a strategy. Walter would send a formal request for Marcus to share his implementation refinement with both of us for review and coordination. The request would cite normal executive protocols rather than questioning his authority to develop alternative approaches. Once we had the details, Philip would conduct a technical assessment comparing both implementations against the security requirements identified by Parks's team. The email went out immediately, with a request for documentation by end of day so we could ensure alignment across executive leadership. I returned to my office to brief Elena on the situation and continue our implementation work. If Marcus was building a parallel track, we needed to make as much progress as possible on our approved approach before any potential disruption. An hour later, Marcus himself appeared at my office door. He looked as polished as ever, but there was a new confidence in his posture, the bearing of someone who believed he had regained the upper hand. "Alex," he said pleasantly. "Mind if I come in?" I gestured to a chair, maintaining a professional demeanor. "Welcome back. How was New York?" "Productive," he replied with a thin smile. "I assume Walter told you about my meeting with the BD team this morning." "He mentioned it. We're looking forward to reviewing your refinement proposal." Marcus leaned back, studying me. It's not really a proposal at this point, more of a collaborative exploration with the implementation teams. I wanted to get their input before formalizing anything. Understandable, I said, matching his casual tone. But since it potentially impacts the strategy approved by the board, Walter and I would appreciate being included in those explorations from the beginning. A flash of irritation crossed his face before his smile returned. Of course, though I wouldn't characterize it as impacting the board-approved strategy so much as enhancing its execution based on new information. New information from your meetings in New York? I asked innocently. He hesitated, clearly calculating how much to reveal. Among other sources, the investment landscape for Asia-Pacific expansion is evolving rapidly. There are opportunities emerging that weren't available when the board made its initial decision. Alternative investors with different implementation preferences, I suggested, echoing what he'd told the BD team. His eyes narrowed slightly. I see Jason was thorough in his report. Yes, there are potential partners who see value in a more balanced approach, one that accelerates market entry while developing security capabilities in parallel rather than as a prerequisite. That sounds very similar to what you suggested before the board vote, I observed. The approach they considered and declined in favor of our full security implementation. Marcus waved this away. The context has changed. The board made the best decision with the information available at the time. Now, there are new options worth considering, which we'd be happy to review once you share the details, I said pleasantly. Particularly the security implications of a phased implementation compared to our current approach. He stood, smoothing his already immaculate suit. I'll have something formal for you by tomorrow. In the meantime, I've scheduled a follow-up with the BD team to continue refining the execution details. After he left, I immediately called Walter to report the conversation. He's moving quickly, I concluded, building momentum with the BD team while keeping us waiting for formal details. Classic Marcus, Walter said wearily. Create facts on the ground that become difficult to reverse. We need to prepare our counter-strategy without waiting for his documentation. We agreed that Philip should begin preparing a security assessment framework immediately, based on what we already knew of Marcus's likely approach. I would also accelerate our own implementation timeline, focusing on demonstrable progress that would make any shift in strategy increasingly disruptive. By late afternoon, Marcus still hadn't provided his promised documentation. Instead, he had expanded his alignment meetings to include members of the finance team and regional partnership managers, gradually building a coalition for his alternative approach while keeping Walter and me technically informed but substantively excluded. At 5 p.m., Elena brought me a copy of an email that had been circulating among the BD team, a preliminary implementation timeline for what Marcus was now calling the accelerated market entry strategy. It outlined a significantly reduced security implementation for the first 6 months of expansion, with full protocol deployment deferred to a Phase 2 that would begin only after initial market establishment. Where did you get this? I asked, scanning the document with growing concern. Jason from Walter's office. It's being distributed as a working draft for discussion purposes. She lowered her voice. There's more. Marcus has scheduled a presentation to the executive leadership team for Friday morning, the same day Parks' final investment agreement is due. The timing was deliberate, creating a direct conflict between our approved implementation strategy, now backed by Parks' imminent investment, and Marcus's alternative approach with its unnamed potential partners. It was forcing a decision, point exactly when we should have been celebrating the finalization of the Parks agreement. I called Walter immediately, and we quickly agreed on a course of action. First, Philip would conduct an expedited security assessment of Marcus's accelerated market entry strategy based on the circulating draft, evaluating it against the same criteria used for our approach. Second, Walter would personally call Parks to ensure the investment agreement arrived before Marcus's Friday presentation. And third, I would prepare a comprehensive comparison of both approaches to present to the executive team, focusing not just on security, but on business implications, client confidence, and long-term market position. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Philip and his team worked through the night on their security assessment, using the limited documentation of Marcus's approach to model potential vulnerabilities and risk scenarios. The results were exactly as we expected. His phased implementation created significant security gaps during the critical initial market entry period, precisely when client trust would be most fragile and regulatory scrutiny most intense. I incorporated these findings into my comparative analysis, creating a clear visual representation of the risk profiles of both approaches. Where Marcus's timeline showed accelerated market entry, mine showed the corresponding security vulnerabilities that would be exposed during that period. Where he emphasized capital efficiency, I highlighted the potential costs of security breaches, regulatory penalties, and damaged client relationships. By Thursday evening, both Walter and I were prepared for the executive meeting. Parks had confirmed that his final investment agreement would be delivered first thing Friday morning, giving us concrete evidence of the financial support behind our approved implementation strategy. Philip's security assessment provided technical validation of our concerns about Marcus's alternative approach, and my comparative analysis framed the choice not as a battle of executive authority, but as a clear-eyed evaluation of risk and reward. Marcus, meanwhile, had continued his campaign of coalition building. Throughout Thursday, he held individual meetings with key influencers across departments, presenting his approach as the pragmatic middle ground between inadequate security and excessive caution. He was careful never to directly criticize Walter or me, positioning himself instead as the practical problem solver, finding a way to accommodate everyone's priorities. When Friday morning arrived, the stage was set for a defining confrontation. Walter had received Parks's final investment agreement, even more favorable than the initial proposal, with a 20% capital increase specifically designated for security implementation. Philip had completed his assessment, confirming that Marcus's approach created unacceptable vulnerability windows during critical market entry phases, and I had refined my comparative analysis into a compelling presentation that left little room for ambiguity about the risks of Marcus's accelerated market entry strategy. As I prepared for the executive meeting, I received a text from Elena. Marcus in Walter's office now. Closed door. Voices raised. I hurried to Walter's office, arriving just as Marcus stormed out, his face flushed with anger. He brushed past me without acknowledgement, disappearing down the hallway toward the executive conference room where the leadership team would be gathering shortly. Walter stood in his doorway, his expression a mixture of sadness and determination. He asked me to cancel Parks's investment and pursue his alternative partners instead, he said as I approached. When I refused, he threatened to take it directly to the board, to force a choice between his vision and mine. Can he do that? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Walter nodded grimly. As a major shareholder's son, he has certain rights. He can call for a special board review if he believes the company's interests are being compromised. He sighed deeply. It's come to this then, a direct confrontation I hoped to avoid. I thought of all we had accomplished in the past weeks, the technical advances, the client validation, the investor commitment. All now threatened by Marcus's inability to accept that his vision wasn't the one chosen by the board. What's our strategy for the meeting? I asked. Walter straightened, his resolve visibly hardening. Truth, Alex. Clear-eyed, factual assessment of both approaches. No personal attacks, no appeals to authority, just the evidence and implications. Let the leadership team see exactly what's at stake. As we walked together toward the conference room, I felt a strange calm descend. This wasn't just about Marcus and me anymore, or even about a security protocol. It was about the kind of company Meridian would become, one that prioritized thorough solutions over quick wins, client trust over market expediency, long-term resilience over short-term efficiency. Walter had built that company. I had helped shape it, and now together we would fight to preserve it. The executive conference room was already full when we arrived. Faces turned expectantly toward the door. Marcus stood at the front, presentation materials ready. He met my eyes briefly, a flicker of challenge in his expression before he turned to address the assembled leadership team. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making time for this important discussion about our Asia-Pacific implementation strategy. We have some significant opportunities to consider that could accelerate our expansion while optimizing our resource allocation." The battle for Meridian's future had begun. The executive conference room fell silent as I stood to present. After Marcus finished, with calm precision, I laid out our comparative analysis, not attacking Marcus personally, but letting the data speak for itself. Philip's security assessment painted a stark picture. Marcus's accelerated approach created a 6-month vulnerability window where client data would be at significant risk. "This isn't about timelines or resources," I concluded. "It's about the foundation of trust we're building in these new markets. Once broken, that trust may never fully recover." When questions came, they were pointed but fair. Marcus defended his approach vigorously, emphasizing faster market entry and capital efficiency. But with each exchange, the mood in the room shifted. The technical evidence was irrefutable, the business implications clear. His unnamed alternative investors seemed increasingly hypothetical against Parks's signed agreement in Walter's hands. The decisive moment came when Philip spoke up, not at my prompting, but from genuine conviction. As someone initially skeptical of the protocol, I can't support an implementation that deliberately creates security gaps we know how to prevent. It's not just technically unsound, it's ethically questionable. By meeting's end, the consensus was clear. We would proceed with the full implementation as approved by the board. Marcus sat stiffly as Walter formally confirmed the decision, his expression unreadable. Afterward, as the room emptied, Marcus approached me. "Congratulations," he said, his voice quiet. "You've won this round decisively." "It wasn't about winning, Marcus. Wasn't it?" A faint, bitter smile crossed his face. "We both know this was always about more than security protocols." "Yes," I agreed. "It was about the kind of company Meridian should be." He studied me for a long moment. "I still believe my vision was the right one, but..." He hesitated, something shifting in his expression. "I can acknowledge when I've been outmaneuvered." It wasn't quite concession, but it was the closest I'd get to recognition from him. 3 weeks later, Marcus announced his resignation to pursue entrepreneurial opportunities. The official statement was gracious, the private reality more complicated. Walter later told me Marcus had finally recognized that his vision for Meridian would never supersede the foundation his uncle had built. He needed his own company to shape as he saw fit. The Morrison protocol was implemented across all high-security clients, becoming Meridian's signature differentiator in competitive bids. The Asia-Pacific expansion proceeded with Parks's investment, establishing Meridian as a trusted partner in markets where security credentials were paramount. 6 months after that pivotal meeting, Walter called me into his office. "The board has been discussing succession planning," he said without preamble. "For Marcus's position?" I asked. "For mine," he replied. "Not immediately, but within the next few years. Your name is at the top of their list." The journey from being fired in a 3-minute conversation to being considered as Meridian's future CEO was almost too much to comprehend. But in that moment, I understood the most important lesson of the entire experience. True value isn't in titles or authority, but in creating something worth fighting for, and having the courage to stand your ground when it matters most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.